Psychology says that growing up without your parents doesn't just shape your childhood. It shapes the adult you become, the relationships you choose, the way you handle conflict, the way you respond to love, and the way you see yourself when nobody's watching. And if you grew up without one or both parents, whether through abandonment, death, divorce, neglect, or just emotional absence, you already know that the effects didn't stop when you turned 18. They followed you. They're probably still following you right now. This isn't about blaming your parents or turning your childhood into an excuse. This is about understanding what actually happens psychologically when a child grows up without the presence they were biologically wired to need. Because the brain doesn't just move on. It adapts. And those adaptations become patterns, and those patterns run quietly in the background of your adult life until you stop and actually look at them. So let's look at them. The first pattern is called anxious attachment. And it's one of the most common psychological outcomes in adults who grew up without consistent parental presence. Here's how it works. When you're a child, your brain is wired to seek proximity to a caregiver. That's not emotional, that's biological. Your survival literally depends on an adult being close, responsive, and consistent. When that adult is absent, or when they appear and disappear without warning, your nervous system doesn't just feel sad about it. It goes into a state of permanent alert. It starts scanning constantly for signs that the people it needs are about to disappear again. That alert system doesn't turn off when you grow up. It just redirects. Instead of scanning for a parent, you start scanning for a partner, a friend, a boss, anyone you've let yourself need. And the scanning looks like this. You check your phone too often, waiting for a message back. You read into silence as rejection. You apologize for things that don't require an apology. You work overtime to keep people happy because somewhere in your nervous system, keeping people happy is the same as keeping them from leaving. You're not being dramatic. You're not insecure for no reason. Your brain learned a very specific lesson in childhood, that people who are supposed to stay don't always stay, and it has been trying to prevent that from happening again ever since. Research puts anxious attachment in roughly 20% of the general adult population. But among adults who experienced early parental loss or absence, that number climbs significantly. Because this isn't a personality flaw. It's a nervous system response to an environment that trained it to expect loss. The second pattern is hyper-independence. And this one is sneaky because it doesn't look like damage from the outside. It looks like strength. It looks like self-sufficiency. It looks like someone who has their life together and doesn't need anyone. But underneath it is a child who learned, at a very early age, that needing people is dangerous. That depending on someone means setting yourself up to be let down. So they stopped depending. They started handling everything alone. They became the adult in the room before they were old enough to be in that room. In adulthood, hyper-independence looks like refusing help even when you genuinely need it. It looks like feeling physically uncomfortable when someone tries to do something for you. It looks like an internal voice that says asking for help is weakness, or that needing support means you're a burden. It looks like relationships that stay surface level because going deeper means letting someone in, and letting someone in means they could leave, and leaving is the thing your whole psychology has been organized around preventing. The hyper-independent person isn't cold. They're not arrogant. They're someone whose earliest experiences taught them that the only reliable person in the room was themselves, and they built an entire identity around that conclusion. The cruel part is that hyper-independence is often rewarded. At work, you get praised for being capable and low maintenance. In friendships, people enjoy being around you because you never ask for too much. In relationships, you seem stable and independent and attractive. And so the pattern gets reinforced again and again until it's not just a coping mechanism anymore. It's your personality. Except it's not really your personality. It's armor. And armor is exhausting to wear indefinitely. The third pattern is emotional avoidance, and this one operates at a deeper level than the first two. It's not just that you avoid depending on people. It's that you've built an entire life around avoiding the experience of your own emotions. And this makes complete psychological sense when you understand where it comes from. A child who had no consistent caregiver quickly learns that expressing emotions is pointless at best and dangerous at worst. Crying didn't bring anyone. Anger wasn't met with patience. Fear wasn't soothed. So over time the child stops expressing, then stops feeling, then genuinely loses track of what they're feeling, because feeling things that nobody responds to is a specific kind of pain that the brain eventually decides isn't worth repeating. So the child learns to function instead of feel. They become competent, capable, productive. They excel in environments with clear structures and measurable outcomes because those environments don't require them to access the part of themselves they've been keeping sealed. They build careers, routines, and habits that keep them moving fast enough that there's never really a quiet moment where the feelings might catch up. In adulthood, this looks like choosing work over rest, busyness over stillness, logic over emotion in every conversation that matters. It looks like the person who is excellent in a crisis and completely shut down in an intimate moment. It looks like someone who can support everyone around them through hard times but has no idea what to do with their own hard times because they've never really had the experience of someone sitting with them through one. And this is where it starts affecting your future. Because emotional avoidance doesn't stay in one lane. It bleeds into every relationship you try to build. It makes genuine intimacy nearly impossible because intimacy requires you to be present with your own interior, and your interior has been sealed for so long you're not even sure what's in there anymore. The people who try to get close to you eventually feel like they're talking to a wall, not because you don't care, but because the door to where you actually live has been locked for so long you've almost forgotten where the key is. The fourth pattern is what psychologists call identity confusion. And this is where growing up without parents starts affecting not just your relationships, but your relationship with yourself. Most people develop a sense of identity through something called parental mirroring. Your parents reflect back to you who you are. They notice what you're good at. They validate what makes you unique. They provide a stable reference point that tells you, this is who you are, this is what you're worth, this is what makes you different from everyone else. When that mirroring is absent or inconsistent, you don't get that reference point. You have to figure out who you are completely alone, and usually while you're also trying to survive whatever instability caused your parents to be absent in the first place. So what happens is you become whoever you need to be in any given moment. You learn to read what the adults around you want, and you become that. You learn to shape yourself into the version that gets you the least conflict, the most approval, the best chance of not being abandoned again. And over time, this adaptability starts to feel like your personality. Except it's not. It's a survival skill. And the problem with building your entire sense of self around adaptability is that eventually you realize you have no idea who you actually are underneath all the adapting. In adulthood, this looks like chronic people-pleasing that you can't seem to turn off even when you want to. It looks like changing your opinions depending on who you're with. It looks like feeling like a fraud even when you're successful. Because success doesn't tell you who you are, it just tells you that you performed well in a role someone else valued. It looks like standing in front of your own life and genuinely not knowing what you want because you've spent so long figuring out what other people want that your own preferences have become background noise you can barely hear anymore. The fifth pattern is difficulty trusting that good things will last. And this isn't general pessimism. This is something much more specific. When you grow up without stable parental presence, your brain learns a very clear lesson about impermanence. The lesson is this: the things you need most don't stay. People leave. Safety disappears. Love, if it shows up at all, doesn't last long enough to rely on. That lesson gets encoded deeply, not as a thought you can talk yourself out of, but as a baseline expectation your nervous system operates from automatically. So when good things happen in your adult life, when you meet someone who actually treats you well, when you land a job you care about, when a relationship starts feeling stable and real, your brain doesn't relax into it. It braces. It starts waiting for the collapse. It scans for signs that this, like everything else, is temporary. And because you're scanning for those signs, you find them. You misinterpret a partner's bad day as them pulling away. You read normal workplace feedback as evidence you're about to be fired. You take any small friction in a friendship as proof that the friendship is ending. Not because you're irrational, but because your past taught you that good things are just the calm before the loss, and your nervous system is trying to prepare you for what it believes is inevitable. The cruelest part of this pattern is that it often creates the very outcome it fears. When you're constantly braced for someone to leave, you start behaving in ways that push them toward the door. You test them. You create conflict to see if they'll stay through it. You pull back first so they can't leave you, which makes them feel shut out, which makes them actually consider leaving, which confirms what you suspected all along. And the cycle repeats. Psychology calls this a self-fulfilling prophecy, but living through it doesn't feel theoretical. It feels like proof that you were right to never trust good things in the first place. The sixth pattern, and this one is particularly hard to name because it operates so quietly, is a deep discomfort with being seen. Not the surface-level scene, the kind that happens in small talk or professional settings, but the kind of scene that happens when someone looks at you long enough to notice the parts you usually keep hidden. When you grow up without parents, you learn very early that the version of yourself that survives is the one that doesn't ask for too much, doesn't take up too much space, doesn't show too much need. So you learn to edit yourself in real time. You learn to present the version that's easiest for others to deal with. And you get so good at it that the unedited version, the one with needs and fears and uncertainty, starts to feel dangerous to let anyone see. In adulthood, this shows up as relationships that stay emotionally shallow even after years. It shows up as an instinct to deflect whenever a conversation gets too personal, too vulnerable, too close to the truth of what you're actually feeling. It shows up as a feeling of intense discomfort when someone compliments you in a way that's too specific, too accurate, because accurate means they're seeing something real and real feels unsafe. The version of yourself that survived childhood was the one that stayed small and undemanding. The version that needed things, that showed vulnerability, that asked to be seen fully, that version didn't get its needs met. So you stopped being that version. And now, even when you're with people who would respond to that version with care, you can't bring yourself to let it out, because the risk feels like survival, and survival instincts don't respond well to logic. But here's where it starts limiting your future. Because intimacy, the real kind, the kind that actually heals and sustains and makes life feel less isolating, requires being seen. Not perfectly, not all at once, but genuinely. It requires letting someone past the version you perform and into the version you actually are. And if being seen feels like a threat, then intimacy stays out of reach. You can have relationships. You can have people in your life. But the connection will always hit a ceiling, because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires letting yourself be seen, and being seen requires trusting that the person seeing you won't use what they see against you or leave because of it. And if your earliest experiences taught you that people leave, or that need is dangerous, or that the real you isn't worth staying for, then that trust never fully forms. And without that trust, you stay in relationships that are close enough to feel less alone, but distant enough that you never have to risk the kind of abandonment that shaped you in the first place. The last thing worth understanding is that none of these patterns make you broken. They make you adapted. Every single one of them made sense in the environment you grew up in. Hypervigilance kept you safe when your environment was unstable. Emotional avoidance protected you from pain nobody was going to help you process. Difficulty trusting kept you from being blindsided when people left. These were intelligent responses to real conditions. The problem is that those conditions are no longer your reality, but your nervous system is still operating as if they are. And changing that doesn't happen through willpower or positive thinking. It happens slowly, in relationship, with people who show up consistently enough that your nervous system starts to learn a different pattern. One where people stay. Where vulnerability doesn't lead to abandonment. Where being seen doesn't result in rejection. That learning takes time. But it is possible. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. I make videos like this regularly.